Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Thinking Beyond Reports, Northeast Georgia's Health System Journey to an Analyst Mindset. My name is Colleen Lezovitz, and I'm a marketing manager at CLIC, and I'm joined by the team at Northeast Georgia Health System who has been responsible for the business intelligence journey. This includes Dr. Mohak Jabe, Dalton Ruhr, Dr. James Bailey, and Mark Ellingson. Before we begin, just some quick instructions regarding the webinar. As you can see, we are utilizing WebEx, and all participants will be on mute throughout the entire session. However, if you do experience any technical issues, please utilize the Q&A window in the bottom right-hand corner of the console. Please also use this window to submit questions at any time during the presentation because we will be reserving about 10 minutes at the end to answer them. At this time, I would like to hand things over to Dalton. Dalton?
Thank you very much, Colleen. Hello, everybody. My name is Dalton Ruhr. I'm a business intelligence architect here at Northeast Georgia Health System. And before I begin this show, I'm actually going to share a little story with you to try to acclimate you to what it is that I believe we're trying to do. Excuse me, young man, what is it you're doing? Excuse me, young man, what are you doing? Young man looked up pretty disgruntled. I'm laying bricks, lady. Well, the elderly woman continued safely across the work zone until she found the next worker. Excuse me, young man, what are you doing? Yo, lady, I'm building a wall, 100 feet wide, and it's going to be 30 feet high. Let me get back to work. She apologized, but after 85 years of walking past this wide open field nearly every day of her life, she continued on because she needed to know more. Excuse me, young man, what are you doing? This man looked completely different than the others. He stood up, brushed the dust off his well-worn jeans, and smiled the biggest smile she had ever seen. Lady, we're just getting started on building the world's most amazing cathedral. When we get finished, and he continued to hold her hand and walk her around the job site and share with her what was going on. Folks, what we do is try to transform wide open spaces with zeros and ones that are skewed all over the place in a mess, and we try to make sense of that. I contend that we're trying to build cathedrals. Whether you're a CIO, a senior business analyst, a lean transformation specialist, director of analytics, a healthcare analyst, you're a nurse transforming herself into nursing informatics, you're a marketing manager, you're not even in the IT field, whether you're a business consultant who travels around the country helping companies do this. What we do is important, and what we do is hard. We're trying to do things that nobody else has done. Let me share with you a little bit about my health system. We're located in Northeast Georgia, and we're kind of tucked away near the mountains, kind of a well-kept secret for Georgia. I'm really excited. In April, we're going to be opening a new 100-bed hospital, and all the data modeling I've done to this point shows me that my salary is going to get doubled as soon as we build our second facility. So I'll check back later and find out if that's the case or not, but I'm sure hopeful, and that's what my data modeling has showed me. One of the things that we're really proud of is that while we are pretty much a secret to most of the world, those in healthcare analytics have recognized us the last several years. We made the Truven list for 100 top hospitals last year, and we were Georgia's #1 hospital last year. But that's the past. What's going on now? This is really exciting. This just came out the other day from CareChex. We are now the #2 hospital in the nation for medical excellence, behind somebody called Mayo Clinic. I think somebody might have heard of them. I'm not sure who they are, though. But we're #2, and we're really, really proud of that and excited for what the future holds. Not only is our healthcare workers doing a great job, we are really proud of what we're trying to leverage with our IT infrastructure, and we began winning a lot of awards, not just in the healthcare field, but in information technology overall. We really believe that IT is the way to help leverage and get us to where we need to be next. I'm going to show you several different applications today. Some of these I want to go through kind of quickly, so I'm just going to show you some slides regarding our surgical costing application, accounting application, our OR turnover and utilization application, and the ED dashboard that I'm going to let Dr. DeVay address a little bit with you. Once we get through those, we're going to move on to a demo with QlikView, and I'm going to show you our CPOE application. And then, oddly enough, I'm going to show you a QlikSense application also for that ED dashboard to show you where I believe the future is kind of heading. So let's go ahead and jump in. The first application is our surgical costing application. Unlike most of our QlikView applications, this one is based a lot on stats. So we took 365 rolling days of data, and before the application gets started, that's pre-aggregated. So while most of you don't get into applications that have disclaimers, I felt it important to let people know the numbers that we're comparing to our variances have been pre-calculated. So if you narrow down time frames or specific physicians, these variances aren't going to change. The rest of the numbers in the application are. So let me just acclimate you a little bit to the screen. On the side is simply a slider so that you can say, hey, I don't really care about procedures in this hospital that have been done unless we've done at least 5 of them during this time frame. And that way you're not trying to look at cost variance between 2 procedures. The whole goal of this application is to try to help you find that needle in the haystack. What procedures out there among the thousands that are done and the 50,000 CDM codes that are used have the most variance from surgeon to surgeon? In this case, this procedure has the greatest variance. There were 5 cases of it, and it ranged from one surgeon whose average was $35,900 to a low of $80. We would certainly want to drill into that. When you drill into a procedure, then you can see that ranking by the surgeons. And it will color code based on standard deviation, show you surgeons who are way above that standard deviation or way below. In this case, we found one surgeon who's done a procedure, and it's way outside the lines of what others have done. If you click to drill into the details, you can scroll through and you'll see a comparison surgeon to surgeon. So you can see what CDM codes did this surgeon use or these surgeons use compared to this one. And you can immediately identify costs that are way out of line. Why did this person use this particular thing for this surgery when the others weren't? In this case, it was only one surgery. So you may get into some records and you realize, hey, that's completely justified. Or you may find out this person's using a hip replacement that is way outside the costing of what other hip replacements are. The beauty of us having big data now is that then when the surgeon says, oh, well, my outcomes are much better than the other guys, well, his idea of outcomes are likely based on hearsay and what he sees in the hospital. All of us know you can get to all that data now. What were the length of stays for his patients? What were the readmission rates? And you can pull all of that data together to try to help that story. This application is used by our finance department, and in fact was helped kind of co-developed by them. This was one of our first apps where it was really our attempt to say, hey, IT can't drive everything. QlikView is very easily accessible by other developers, and so we were more than happy to bring them aboard as a partner and let them continue to drive this application, and they drove it from where it was to where it is today, and we've got great plans for this for the future. It's also used in surgical administration and started getting some traction with surgeons, which is another area that I wanted to highlight because we've kind of taken a different impact. We started out, or I should say I started out, doing these with an IT mindset. Most of our applications are driven by administration, and they come up with an administrative look and feel. I want to finger this guy. I want to point to this. I want to see the weaknesses. I want to see the areas for improvement. And what we're hoping to do with this application and others in the future is really drive the entire UI experience from a surgeon's perspective. let them know this application is for you, not for administration. We want to put faith in these surgeons and our providers to let them really police themselves and say, gee, I just didn't know there was something new available. I might have missed that email that these replacement parts came cheaper now and can use them. So this application really helped us kind of identify that need. This application, not really a traditional IT type thing, usually this is built right into financial packages, is for our accounting department and finance department. It shows classic income statements and balance sheets, but in a way that other systems can't. In a traditional application, you might write hundreds and hundreds of reports to track every possible variation of what it is you're looking for. Well, I want a report just for this corporation. I want a report for these two corporations. I need a report comparing these two corporations. With QlikView, we can bring all that data in and surface it in all the ways that you can do normally with QlikView by filtering. One of the things that if you take advantage of an interval match function that QlikView has, you can tie and map out things like this to where you can have headers, you can have footers. Inside of a chart, like a table, you can actually say, hey, if this row type is a certain thing, I want you to show me a number. If the row type is a different type of row, I want you to show me my little typical underlines. If the row type is for a total, I want you to give me a sum, and so on. I think you get the idea. So I wanted to show this just to show you something way out of the box from a traditional visualization perspective. You can visualize very old school, but with some very cool technologies that let you then drill into specific accounts, filter to specific things as you need. And of course, even better, when somebody says, well, I don't believe that total, you can drill immediately to the journal entries behind what you were visualizing and say, well, if that number is not right, what could it be? And then they say, oh, gee, we were supposed to reverse that $34,644. We completely forgot. It must not have got postage yet. As you can guess, this is used primarily by accounting and finance, but also by my own department. There's a lot of times that they'll need ad hoc data requests that may need to get sent. So we have an entire tab for extracts that are kind of canned that we can run through. They use these, but we can also use those too if they need one-off, and there's somebody that needs it quickly and they're not quite familiar, they haven't come up to speed on how to use QlikView properly to get to that. The next application is more of, I guess, what you would probably see from a traditional analytic tool where it's kind of flashy. You've got the aesthetics to match the deep analytics going on behind it. I know that they take up a lot of room, but gauges are really pretty when you're going to print a screen and hang it up so you've got something to target for committees, or you want to put in your queue as talking points when people come visit you. So this application uses a little bit of space, but I think they're kind of pretty. This first tab is simply trying to match what percent of the patients were turned over within a 20-minute target. That simply means one patient wheels out of room 6. How long does it take us to get that next patient wheeled in? In that time, all the cleanup has to get done. We have to prep for that next surgery, et cetera. So there's a 20-minute target for that. The next one is an incision turnover target. Once we suture and finish that previous patient, how long does it take to get that next patient's incision started? The last one is a room utilization. How much are we using those surgical rooms? Those rooms are really, really expensive. So these are the high-level numbers. In our particular OR, we have 4 different base categories of rooms. So these are different rooms within the OR suite, and we can track what those numbers are. So we can see the endoscopy department is doing really, really good. Patient turnover, it's also doing very, very good on incision turnover, but we're not really using those rooms that are set aside for endoscopy as highly as we are the others. I should have mentioned earlier, and I apologize, a lot of this data has been faked. The targets are not the right targets, and some of the data is fake, just to make the points of how you would use visualization to identify certain things. You can wrap out the main screen and give them a reference. How many cases are we dealing with? so that if they filter down to a particular week or a particular day or weekends, they can quickly see, hey, I'm only dealing with 5 cases. I don't care about these percentages. Or, hey, this is a pretty good statistical population. I think I can trust these numbers. Room cert utilization is a big thing. So this is not as pretty aesthetically of the screen, but the folks that use it really wanted the ability to be able to track and drill the thing. So instead of offering a multi-select box for filtering, they can click on anything that they want. They can pick locations. They can pick specific rooms, specific caregivers, specific rooms, procedure types, starting days, days of the week, etc. They can track it in a number of ways. One of the ways that we can track this is through a quick pivot table to say, hey, in these specific rooms, how many days was that room in use? How many available minutes were there for the times that we slotted? What was the total number of minutes that we used the room? And then give me a percentage. If we find one that we say, man, this seems really low, are there differences between shifts? Are we using it better at this shift and not as good in the other shift? Within the shift, what are the hours that we're doing? And, of course, you can always drill right down to the cases and say, here's the case that was causing us an issue, and which cases made that up, so that if somebody needs to verify this data, we can quickly get to it. That application obviously was being used by the surgical department primarily. Some of it is also used by finance to just track numbers so that we can see for head counts. Dr. DeVay, I'm going to let you take it away. This is our Every Minute Matters application. We call it our ED dashboard.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mohawk DeVay. I'm the Medical Director for Northeast Georgia Medical Center's Emergency Department. We range between the 2nd and 3rd busiest emergency department in the entire state of Georgia. So obviously making data-driven decisions for us is critically important. I can tell you that I've had experience working with this application now for almost 2 years, and it has been a game changer for how we manage and staff in ED. Our group has 25 ED physicians and about 15 mid-level providers, so I can make personnel decisions, staffing decisions, as well as clinical decisions by using this tool. One thing that I think has been very helpful for us is I call this application oftentimes, it basically serves to me as a great myth debunker. There are a lot of things that we take in medicine from a clinical standpoint as the gospel that end up being the exact opposite when you actually apply analytics to it. A good example I would give you is when I tell my neighbors that I've got to work Friday night in the emergency department. They'll often tell me, oh boy, it's going to be a busy night, you better be ready for it. But actually I tell them all the time that actually Monday afternoon is our highest volume of any day in the ED, and we actually make staffing decisions based on such. So on this dashboard here, you can see that I'm able to track I can choose by calendar date, I can choose by month, I can choose yesterday, all kinds of different data points that I can choose to look at what I find information that's relevant to how we practice medicine here at Northeast Georgia Medical Center. I want to track my minutes to bed, door to provider time, how long it takes for a doctor to make a decision and disposition a patient, look at length of stays, look at left without being seen, and look at admissions. Another way that I can use this as myth debunkers is oftentimes a nurse will come up to me and say, oh, I've got to work with Dr. X today. He's your slowest doctor. And actually I can either validate or invalidate that and pull up the data, extrapolate it over 2,000 or 3,000 visits and debunk some myths that we have about some of our own practitioners. And the other thing that's been very helpful too is looking at our left without being seen. We can look at it from a business standpoint and say with predictability, when will we see most of our patients come through the door and then leave because of the wait time? And we see that it's oftentimes in the afternoon. We've also been able to debunk the myth that these patients don't really need to be here because they left without being seen. They probably weren't that sick to begin with. And that's actually been very helpful to look at the data because I can look at triage acuity and look at my left without being seen, and you actually realize that people that leave without being seen aren't just people with minor complaints. They're people with more severe complaints, headaches, chest pains, abdominal pains. So that's very helpful when you have to go to your higher-ups to encourage them to create more ED capacity. So again, having the power at your fingertips to run reports so that I can look at volume on Thanksgiving or Christmas Day or Super Bowl or what happens during a Georgia-Florida football game, it's very amazing to look at how predictable a lot of this is. And that's been really fun for me to look at from a clinical as well as a business standpoint. You can probably go to the next slide, Dalton. Another example here again is talking about just by the predictability. Remember I talked about Friday nights and comparing that to Mondays, so I can look at my volume by day of week. I can search it by ED physician, by chief complaint, by how many people are in hallway beds, so that I can go to folks in my organization and say, you know, I've got a lot of sick patients that are in an ED hallway at this time. What are some things that we can do to strategize to minimize the impact of such? I can look at my fast track area, my psychiatric area, my main ED, and basically drill down to that specificity and say, how do the doctors compare against one another in terms of their length of stays? So tremendous data analytics here. You can go to the next slide, Dalton. Another thing that's important for all of us, of course, is flow. So, you know, I think most facilities that I'm aware of, at least in the Georgia area, struggle with admission throughput. And we can actually drill this down and break it up between the different segments to say, how much time does it take for a patient to get to a bed if they're admitted? How long does it take for the doctor to see them? How long does it take for the doctor to make a call to get a hospitalist to admit that patient? How long does it take for the hospitalist to put orders in? And then how long does it take for them to actually leave the department? And we can look and see by day of week, by specific hospitalist team, by the type of specialist that admits, whether it's a surgeon versus a intensivist or a hospitalist, look at their performance. And so again, as we look to standardize the patient experience, this type of data is tremendously helpful when you're trying to impact change. Next slide.
Thank you very much, Dr. DeVay. I appreciate that. I thought it was important for everybody to be able to hear that straight out of the doctor's mouth, per se, rather than me just trying to give you a demo of that, so that you get a sense of what the impact was. Dr. DeVay is probably too humble to let you know this has probably been our most impactful application in the entire organization from what we've done. Not only from what it's done for the ED, but those of you who are at hospitals, you realize the ED is the driver for everything else going on. So as he's tracked these numbers and has reached out to other executives and shown them the numbers, it's really driven more analytic desire from the rest, because he's in meetings saying, I've got the numbers to prove this, and others don't. So it drives them to want to have the numbers to actually show it. I want to go ahead and get into a demo now. Let me share my desktop. This is our CPOE application. For those of you, not everybody I know is clinical. This is computerized physician order entry. The reason that the industry is trying to drive to have physicians enter their orders electronically is because then we can alert. If they're writing orders down and then they're running away and getting in other patient rooms, they might miss the fact that there's an alert that there's a drug-to-drug interaction or that patient might have been allergic to something. So by getting them to put the orders in electronically, we have the opportunity right then to capture them, look them right in the eye and say, hey, there's an issue here. Are you sure you want to do this? And not that everything has issues, obviously, but you've got that opportunity. So this dashboard, what it's trying to track is what's the percent of orders that come in directly. A clinician purposely entered them into the computer and has the opportunity to get that alert. So we can see things overall from an overall perspective. And then what we also did, again, we're trying to track down how do we improve things. It's not just a matter of showing numbers like a canned report. Oh, look, we're at this percentage. Okay, our goal was this, no big deal. We're trying to track down for improvement's sake, because we're always going to raise the bar. It's not that we hit the goal we had this month. It's, are we going to hit the goals we have for the coming months? Are we getting better at what we're doing, or are we barely skating by? So we break these down in different ways. So this is our percentage for lab orders, net orders, RAD orders, other types of orders that are just kind of miscellaneous. So we can look at these and we say, hey, in this particular scenario, the radiology orders are only at 35.6%, and we want to try to fix those. So I can isolate to just RAD orders, and I start looking at the trend. I say, yeah, the trend is getting better, but I want it to get even better than that. With typical CAN reporting, you would say, okay, Dalton, can you show me who the offenders are? Who are the guys that are really bad at doing this? And I say, sure, this group here, they're really bad. They are entering 0% of their orders electronically, and you rush down the hall to start screaming at them. Well, the fact is, you can yell at them till you're blue in the face. They've only input 16 orders out of 208,000. They're not the biggest bang for the buck. And that's the beauty, to me, of analytics compared to other types of reporting is, if I'm going to get actionable intelligence, I need you to show it to me in a way that helps make it intelligent what my actions are going to be. One of the neat things that we found with QlikView is just using Pareto charts. So rather than simply saying, hey, I want to track every group down, let me figure out who the busy guys are, Pareto comes into it from kind of a reverse angle. Who are the people that have entered the most orders indirectly? This group of all of our radiology orders has 32.15% of the indirect orders. If I can focus on them and get them to improve, I can actually have a real impact on my bottom line, as opposed to if I pick one of these guys because I happen to be passing them by and seeing them writing something down. These are not going to have an impact on the business. These top three alone are going to account for 80% of my indirect orders for those radiology orders. So then we say, well, let's drill into something like this. So we can drill into a group, and we say, well, now let's find the caregiver who's responsible, because there's some doctor, and I'm going to go give him a piece of my mind. When you click on this, it doesn't really show much. All of the doctors seem to be about the same. So the problem doesn't seem to be with one physician or another physician. Certainly somebody has a few more orders, but that's not panning out for us. Oh gosh, we just wasted a month on a canned report. Well, no, we didn't. We're using analytics. Let's just take another route. Let's try by order names. Are there specific orders that as a whole that group is having trouble entering electronically? And we find out that there are. There are definitely a few showstoppers here. And just the top 10 orders alone, you can see are responsible for 40% of those undone radiology orders for that group. So instead of going and yelling at that group, we can go have an intelligent conversation now. Hey, I noticed you're not entering the EDXR chest tube view orders and the EDXR chest portable orders electronically. Why is that? Is the problem possibly on our end? Is it hard to search for that? Maybe we ended up giving a description that doesn't make sense and they can't find it electronically. By having this, you've now positioned your staff who's reaching out to these clinicians and trying to boost your goal. You've given them the intelligence that they need to have really sound conversations instead of just shooting in the breeze. Hey, let me find that guy. That poor doctor, he's old-fashioned. He won't use a computer. Well, if he's only doing 10 orders a week, he's really not where you should be focusing your time. So that's the CPOE application. Again, this one has really driven a lot, because once we were able to do this, then this kind of a thing caught on. I was like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have just asked you for a list and order. I should have been able to start to think, where's the real big bang for my buck in terms of trying to improve performance. So if you're out there, especially in some lean transformation organizations, whatever it's called, Quest or Department of Excellence, and you're looking, how can I impact performance? You really need some type of analytics that give you the quick hitters. Let's focus on this and forget the other stuff. So this is used by a lot of our clinical departments, by our administration, by our organization. We track meaningful use and try to improve through this. And we have physician organizations out there pulling these numbers for everybody in their group so that they can have private conversations. It's not me going to yell at Dr. Bailey and telling him his numbers need to go up. It's his physician's group pulls the numbers, and they have those private conversations. From an outreach perspective, though, we look to groups, hey, this seems to be overall. Let me check this chest view. Is that an overall thing for all groups or just that particular groups? And we've used it to be able to drive our order descriptions. We've been able to use it to increase favorites in the application for physicians so they can get to the stuff that really has the biggest bang for the buck for us. So that's our CPOE application. I'm going to take you now into ClickSense. And by this screen alone, you may not even notice a difference. ClickSense is very much like ClickView, and you have access to the same thing. I can put pretty little pictures on there. I can put text on there. I can put numbers on there. Not a big deal. I can filter down to specific time ranges. And I can do a directed type of approach towards analytics. Hey, here's the big numbers. The next thing you might want to know is, hey, let's find our day of the week that has the issues. By using a scatter plot, you can take different dimensions, different measures, and take a look and say, okay, I want to take a look at the days of the week. I want to compare the average arrivals per day by the median minutes from door to bed. I want to see what the pattern is over the week. And as you would have guessed, but now you have the proof, as your busyness goes up on an average, the time it takes to get patients into bed goes up. And we can see a very linear chart here. Once you start seeing good patterns, you've got perfect ways to improve. If these numbers were just scattered and sporadic, you really wouldn't have a whole lot of talking points when you have a meeting trying to drive for something. But when you can compare this and take small segments of data, show it as information, take that information, combine it, and show relationships and correlations, you now have knowledge, and that's the beautiful thing. So now we can see these overall. Now we want to maybe break those down a little bit more. So we can say, hey, here's by day a week, what was the average arrivals, what was the median minutes, and what's the left without being percentage, the left without being seen percentage. So we can see the numbers the same as we could up there, but now we can see something interesting. We can see that this Friday kind of jumps out. Even though the numbers aren't much bigger for times, as soon as we add one other measurement, we can see a different type of relationship. More people are leaving without being seen on Fridays, percentage-wise, than other days. And that doesn't seem to really fit if we're just thinking leaving without being seen has to do with arrivals, how many are there, how many people are sitting there, and how long it's taking to get to bed, because it's not taking that long to get them seen. The other thing that we can see is Sunday is pretty high in terms of average arrivals. It's also up there with the median minutes, and yet it's left without being seen percentages very low. The beautiful thing about true data analytics is now that you have answered the question that was asked initially, but you've given your analysts a chance to go ask additional questions and drive into that stuff. One of the things that we would want to do is maybe pivot this out. Hey, let me pivot out the average arrivals by day of the week and by hour. And what I would want my analysts to do is now look at 168 unique cells and make a determination, hey, where's the busy times? Well, that's what traditional reporting is. We can do those pivots in Excel, and sure, Sally can spend all weekend trying to figure this chart out, or you can use a heat map that I've added down here. Oh, my heat map seems to be gone. Some treehouse goblin got into my application and removed this. Here's the beauty that separates ClickSense from ClickView. While they're viewing an application, this is truly self-service. They can go in and do things live to the application and build their own stuff. So forget this box. They don't want to analyze data that way. They'd like to use a heat map, but poor Dr. DeVay doesn't know how to construct a heat map. One of my favorite aspects of ClickView was the socialization feature where people could build charts, share them out there in like a global library that others could just drag and drop, and guess what? You have that same ability with ClickSense. So I can take a chart that's pre-canned, bring it out there, and now if I just explain that the darkest colors mean the busiest times, is there anybody sitting here who doesn't know where our stress points are for arrivals? And this is the average arrivals per time. Here's where this stuff starts getting even slicker. Dr. DeVay's in a meeting room with a whole bunch of people. He's presenting this data, and somebody asks a question, well, that's nice. When we come back to the next meeting, could you show me some other data like that? Dr. DeVay says, we don't need to wait until the next meeting. What would you like to see? And you say, well, I'd like to see, instead of seeing the average arrivals, I'd like to see how many minutes it takes to get from the door to the doctor and see if there's any hot spots. All that's telling me is I forgot to break the links here because it didn't want to allow Dr. DeVay to change my CAN app. He can replace that, and now we see where the stress points are for the time to be seen by a doctor. He could look and say, hey, I want to see the number of admissions. I want to see where are we sending more patients to the OR. And while he's in the meeting room, he's answering these questions rather than it being him leaving, trying to call Dalton, asking Dalton to add something for directed BI. So that is really where I see ClickSense separating itself from ClickView, is you have the ability for directed BI, and you just put some really incredible power into somebody's hands. The other thing that end users can do is create their own chart. So on this page, maybe you just asked me the question, well, I want to see who the frequent flyers are. I heard through the rumor mill that we have some people who show up a lot. And I want to maybe see, hey, I want to see how many arrivals we've had. And I want to do this not by day a week or by hour. I want to do this by the medical record number. And right before your eyes, we start seeing our frequent flyers. This patient visited us in this time period almost 40 times. And then somebody asked the question, well, how many of those are like real visits where we have to admit them? Well, I don't know. I'll get back to IT in a week, or maybe we just drag in number of admissions and we say, I want to add that as a second measurement. And now we can see this patient has been here almost 40 times. We've never had to admit this patient, whereas this patient has been here a number of times and we've needed to admit them. Let's find out a little bit more about this particular patient. So I can click into that. I filter right from my chart, the same as you can do in ClickView. And then maybe we go to a details tab where we're looking at what happened on these specific visits. I've just showed a little bit of data here, but you get the idea. You can do the same types of things you've always been able to do with ClickView, but you're putting the power in the hands of somebody who can do this from self-service perspective. I'm going to show you a video here that kind of gives you an idea of what I was talking about. I think it's important enough this stuff should be on major news. You should wake up in the morning, drink coffee, and see that your executives in a meeting room are using a pad, walking through an application, and are truly doing self-service BI. Because I think that's going to so revolutionize business, there's not going to be any business, healthcare or otherwise, that's not going to want a piece of that thing. I think that's huge. I'm not making money as a ClickView salesman. They're not paying me to do that. The reason I share that and I'm so passionate about this is for all of you. As I got started, what we do is really, really hard. There's an awful lot to this. But it doesn't have to be all on IT's shoulders. we should be able to share the load. What I love about BI or analytics or data visualization compared to CAN reporting is it's a different work model. With reporting, it's Dr. DeVay calls Dalton, Dalton burns the midnight oil, Dalton produces an Excel spreadsheet or CAN report and hands him back the information he requested. Analytics and business intelligence, I think, is really a joint venture. The problem is with most application tools, you can't really have true co-development. You can't let Dr. DeVay answer questions in the meeting room. I don't want Dr. DeVay to have to call me at 2 a.m. I don't want him to have to write questions down at 2 a.m. and say, oh, I got to remember next time I talk to Dalton to do this. When he's working in the app, I want him to be able to answer the question he comes up with while he's doing the analytics. So Colleen, that kind of wraps it up from our perspective, and we'd be happy to answer questions at this point.
Dalton, you'll see in the chat window that a few have come in, so if you want to take a look and read the question out loud and dive into answering them, that'd be great.
Okay, let me take a look at these. Did any of these people like sent chocolate to me that I should make sure I pick their question, or what? They're all pretty even, Steven, at this point?
Yeah,
right.
You can just go down the line.
Okay. All right. Now, if you want to send chocolate, you can get your question at the top of the list. This first question says, you've shown a range of applications today varying with complexity. What is the average time frame for application development and deployment? That's a great question. There obviously were some very different complexities to these, so the time frames do match. I think the big thing out there for the world, like I say, we've got all these zeros and ones out there, and we're trying to transform that. We're trying to come up with a different workflow and present data. I can slap data on screens really, really quickly. The problem is, how much do I trust that data? So if the data source is already a single source system that's trusted, you can produce an application relatively quickly. If you're dealing with something like length of stay and readmission rates, there's a whole lot of varying opinion on what that means, or what numbers you should be using, or what systems you should pull from. And so there's a lot more interaction that has to happen between a lot of different groups to make sure that you're on the same page. So the time to development really depends on how many groups you have to get involved and how consistent and how much people already trust that data. Because if they don't trust that data, you're kind of out of luck. You spend a lot of time on nothing. So the key is you've got to make sure that data is trustworthy, and that usually takes different time between the apps. What obstacles have you encountered getting departments to embrace analytics versus relying on static reports? I would love to say I've had tremendous success with that, and we've completely turned the organization around. But the reality is there's a lot of static reports that are good. There's workflows that are based on who are the patients I'm supposed to call today as a case manager. What are the surgeries that are planned that I need to schedule and put their trays together for the equipment that they've preferred? Those are beautiful static type things. So we don't want to replace all of those. For analytics, though, it's hard. It really is, because the biggest thing I think I faced is simply when it's a static report, I've got an accountability point. Dalton did that report. He must have done something wrong. It's not my fault. With analytics, they now they're the ones carrying the burden. I have to trust that I'm filtering the right thing that my manager was asking the question about. So getting them to the point that they're comfortable enough trusting their filtering techniques, their analysis techniques, that's really the biggest problem, is helping making them comfortable doing that. There's an excellent resource out there called The Accidental Analyst by Eileen and Stephen McDaniel that is for people who are not IT people, to help them become comfortable understanding data. Hey, what happens when I do this? What really goes on behind the scenes when I do that? So that's kind of the big thing. Let me take a look at the next one. What process do you use to govern your data? Also help us understand the hardware infrastructure behind the dashboard. Boy, that's two completely different types of questions. Data governance is something, when we got started with this, we have a large data mart from McKesson. It's called HBI. And there was a lot of HBI analytics. When we got started, those of us internally weren't quite sure, hey, we've been doing all of our analytics through here. What's going to happen now? Well, the reality was we had years and years of great ETL already laid out, extracting data, and we just continued to use those data marks. We simply surfaced them through QlikView. So QlikView is very flexible, and where am I going to go get that data from? And if you already have a data mart already built, I say go for it. In terms of new data, like I say, the biggest time frame cost is making sure that you have sourced that data in a way that's going to be trustworthy, that you're not going to surface something from QlikView in a way that you can't explain when somebody shows some PDF that's generated from Sally's cocktail napkins that she has. So you really have to make sure that you're getting the right source of data, presenting it in a way that helps people understand. One of the things that we do with our applications is provide help right within the application. We tie that into SharePoint. So our knowledge workers, our data stewards, or our point of contacts within each business unit can create a SharePoint list that says this data point comes from this system. It means this in this application. Here's the filters that we're using. You might not agree with how we calculate readmissions. You might not agree with length of stay, but this is what we did. Here's our definition so that you can see it. So that elusive data dictionary is actually built right into a list and then loaded right into each app so that any user has access to it. Agree or disagree, at least you understand what that definition is. Hardware standpoint, we use two physical servers that we share the web UI with, so that if a lot of users are in and hit some of our bigger applications, those servers can share the front-end load. It's a QlikView cluster is what they would call that. One of those servers is our publisher. We also have for our development, since some of our data sets are very, very large, we wouldn't be able to work on those on our workstations, so we have another physical server that we can remote into with a ton of memory that has QlikView Desktop on there, so multiple developers can be developing apps that might consume 32 gig of memory in order to populate. What EHR vendor does Northeast Georgia use, and what other applications do you pull data from? Our EHR vendor is McKesson. We've had numerous McKesson apps, H.dot apps in the past, if you're familiar with McKesson's H series of apps. Our current one, our primary app, is Paragon, which is replacing a number of those, which is making it very nice to have a more consistent data model. It helps an awful lot that all of the data for finances or billing and orders and all that kind of stuff is in one system that we can pull from, and we know how to link those together, so that's speeding up some of that time to delivery. We know what that source is. We know how to join the records. So that helps things a lot. We also use QlikView to pull from a number of sources. We have a help desk system, and our help desk app is actually one of our highest used apps. We surface the data for help tickets and requests to come in, change orders, work orders, those kinds of things, because QlikView is beautiful. It can show me patterns, it can show me trends, it can show me survey rates, it can show me analysts that are getting better, speeding up in the time that it takes them to resolve tickets, and all that kind of thing. The analytical drilling capabilities you showed, do they need to be predefined in the applications? And here is kind of what separates QlikView from QlikSense. In the ED dashboard, in that one screen that Dr. DeVay showed, it was sort of a semi-self-service. I did an awful lot of work behind the scenes preparing lists of data and then making a chart be flexible enough to say, I'm not going to tell you the field that I want you to use as a dimension. I want you to look at the value that he selected in this list. So he can change the dimension. Instead of canning the expressions, he can click a list and pick whether it's one expression or 5 or 10 to show the columns that he would see for those measurements. So depending on what he wants to do, he can see that. But those all had to be really predefined from my end for that semi-self-service. With ClickSense, I could build in, like I had there, a ton of measurements, all the things that if you're a QlikView developer you would think of as variables. And then you say, well, gee, all you have to do is $expansion, and you'll get to take that formula and come up with a value. And all you have to do is teach your end users how to become coders, and wow, they can do drills all over the place. With ClickSense, I can pre-build those measurements, and what you didn't see was anyone having to drag and drop a dimension and then type some formula. The formulas do have to be pre-canned, but the beauty is I can pre-can all of those things up front. I want to do sums of everything. I want to do averages of everything. I want median minutes of everything. I want timestamps. I want year and month instead of just the dates, and so on and so on. And then the end user really has the opportunity to drag and drop and do exactly what they want on the fly. And I think that's just phenomenal. I know we're approaching time, so one thing I want to wrap up with, and then I'll look for a couple additional questions here, is I started talking about cathedrals. And I don't want it to sound like I believe that my applications are a million times better than anybody's. That is not the point of what we were doing. What I wanted to share was that I understand what we do is hard, whether it's my applications or yours. What I love is the opportunity now that instead of me standing at that work site by myself, taking mortar, slapping it on, adding bricks, I can now have Dr. DeVay have a stack of his own bricks, and he can add on to his own cathedral. What we're getting to the point now with this kind of technology is that your entire workforce, whether they're IT-based or not, now has the ability to take pride in building their own application instead of being so dependent on IT as they have been for so many years. We're getting that data, and instead of saying, hey, you guys don't know what you're doing, let me take care of that for you, we're giving them that ability. However, it's in a way that's governed. I controlled that data source. I'm making sure he's not dealing with data he doesn't know how to join. I've pre-joined it for him. There's additional features behind the scenes where I can take QVDs. That application was all based simply on a QVD that I pulled out of that other application. You can build it to where you can let developers get access to whatever files you want them security-wise to get access to, so you can still maintain that governance, but you're giving them the ability to start surfacing the data differently on their own and on the fly. They can build those apps. That surgical costing app, that was a pain in our old model because we had to have a server for that developer to work with. He doesn't have 64 gig of memory that he can play with on his personal machine. We had to work to where we can have a server infrastructure to give it to him. ClickSense provides that ability. He can work from the web, work mobilely, and the server's doing all the lifting behind the scenes. So I really think we're entering a great age where it's not just going to be IT against the world. There's going to be IT joining forces with every single one of those users in the business who for so many years has been craving access to their own data. It's going to take some time for us to help them understand, hey, I don't want to just give it to you in an Excel sheet. That's not really going to help you do your job. It's not going to lead you to actionable intelligence. It's simply going to be a list of data. All right, so I've made my closing point. Let me look at one more thing. If you were to do it all over again, what would you have done different in implementation? I'm going to be really, really honest with this. When I got started with this, some of the people that I had to work with were very, I'm just going to say they're old. I'm actually, if you knew me, you'd be laughing because I've got no hair, and what is there is white, and I'm considered very old to others. I work with older people, and these were people that had data on cocktail napkins, literally. They had data on notepads. They had data that 15 people had touched and emailed to them. And I looked at them kind of in a condescending way, like, oh my gosh, they really need me to fix this data issue. If I were to do it again, I would realize those people have maintained data with integrity for over 25 years at our company. Those people have the ear of the CEO and the CFO and the CTO. They've got the trust and the respect in dealing with the data. What I've got was a brand new tool in my hands that I knew would change the world, but I approached it as though those people didn't know what they were doing. And what I wish I would have done was started off really trusting those people more and figuring out what it was that they had done so diligently for 25 years to earn that respect and trust, even though their bosses knew they had data on cocktail napkins. So if I were to start over, that's honestly what I would do, is I would look at the other members of the organization and value what they've done to be trusted more. I'm not really comfortable with cocktail napkins yet, nor am I comfortable with things being emailed and touched and handled 15 times, but it worked, and I needed to trust those people and find out how they established the trust. What about IT development resources to prepare cubes, variables behind the scenes? How many people? Our staff is actually fairly small, so we don't deal with necessarily cubes. We have a system called HPM that is a traditional data warehouse. We don't actually surface data from there yet. We take that data and surface it straight out to different locations. But in terms of what we do, we've got a couple different database administrators. We have several SQL-type developers who can write the SQL code to do extracts. We have fewer people who can model the data within QlikView. There's a lot of really, really heavy-duty scripting functionality available in QlikView that over time I've learned to use QlikView more to do some modeling than SQL itself, because I can do some things that take me a lot longer in SQL. We have somebody on our staff who's really more of a GUI guy. He's a presentation specialist, a visual type of guy. And he helps me sit down and say, hey, how does this look? How does this look? Are you believing this? Do you feel in that? If you saw this, are you going to want to click? Where would you want to click if you did this? Is it going to make you want to ask another question, or are you just going to stand back and applaud? We want cathedrals, but we want the cathedrals to be functional. And I think that's about it, unless I'm just missing something in the scroll window here.
That's great, Dalton. I think we'll wrap things up now, but if you did ask a question and Dalton wasn't able to get to it, we will reach out to you individually to answer your question. So this concludes today's webinar. I want to thank you, Dalton, and the rest of the Northeast Georgia Health System team for taking the time today to tell your story. I want to let everyone know that tomorrow I will be sending all participants a link to the on-demand version of this session, so keep an eye out for an email from me. And as a reminder, for more information, we welcome you to visit Qlik.com, where you can find information including white papers, case studies, demos, and a free downloads of both QlikView and QlikSense. Thanks again for joining, and have a wonderful